Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we are going to write the dispatcher. And I'm going to go ahead, actually, and I'm going to be writing some tests for this. So I do already have a server running and compiling our server code, which is right there. And I'm going to put this up on a different monitor. And then what I'm going to do, actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to run our test dev Gulp action. What did I call that? I'm pretty sure it's just test dev. Server test dev. And so I'm going to say Gulp server test dev, hit enter, wait for it to build. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and open up the server, and I'm going to delete the tests folder here. And I'm going to right click, create a new folder called shared. And inside of shared is where we are going to put our dispatcher. And that's because the dispatcher is going to be used both on the server and the client side. So inside of shared, I'm going to create a new file called dispatcher.js. And in addition to dispatcher.js, I'm going to create another file called actions. So inside of shared, I'll create actions.js. Now, actions are going to contain all of the actions that we can perform that is shared by both the client and the server. Both the server and the client will have their own unique actions in some instances, though the majority will be shared between the two. So we'll have another actions file in the server and another actions file in the client. Now, some people like to break their actions apart into different files. For simplicity and time reasons, I'm going to dump them all into the same file. So I'm going to start off with our status. So I'm going to say export const status request equals status request. Export const status fail equals status fail. Export const status success equals status success. And the statuses, some actions will have statuses, some won't. And basically, operation actions such as logging in will have a status field, and it'll be one of these three things, whereas something like, the user's details were updated would not have a request, or a status rather. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a couple helper functions. And these helper functions are going to be functions that take in an action and overwrite the status field. So I'm going to say export function request action, and it'll return ... action status request. And we're going to do the same thing for fail action, and this will have also an error. We're going to return action status fail error. And then we'll export function succeed, which will take in an action and return object spread operator action status success. So all these do is they return a new action object, copying the values from the old action and then applying a new status, or optionally an error in the case of a failure. Before I go any further, we still have a couple tests that I deleted but did not get deleted from the build folder. So I'm going to restart my task just so that it cleans out those old tests, so that the only test that we are going to be running is the ones that we're going to write now. And with the actions out of the way, we can jump over to our dispatcher. I'm going to import a couple things. I'm going to import underscore from Lodash. I'm going to import observable from RxJS, and I'm going to import star as a from /actions. And I'm going to do this on most files, or all files that need actions. I'm going to import all of the actions as the a constant. So I can say a dot, and then I can access those. So I don't have to import each action or status individually. Then I'm going to say export class dispatcher, and I'm going to leave it at that for now. Because what I want to do is I want to show you guys the API of how I envision the dispatcher to work. And when doing a sort of test first sort of workflow, not quite TDD, but kind of like that, it gives you an opportunity to write test code against an imaginary API. And it allows you to take a look at what the code will look like and how to interact with this subject before you actually write any code. So let's write our test file. In shared, I'm going to create a new folder called tests with 2 underscores. Inside of that, I will write another file called dispatcher.js. And we can put this side by side. And for now, we'll just go ahead and full screen this. So the first thing we got to do is we have to go ahead and create some actions. Well, actually, the first thing we have to do is we have to import dispatcher from .. dispatcher, obviously, lowercase d. Then I'm also going to import star as a from .. actions. And then I'm going to say describe, and I'm going to describe dispatcher. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up a function. Inside of this function, I'm going to say let dispatcher equals new dispatcher. And then I'm going to say before each, and I'm going to say before each, whoops, I just wanted to say let dispatcher, and then before each dispatcher equals new dispatcher. So every test gets a new instance of the dispatcher. And that's kind of our basic how we're going to write these tests. Let's go ahead and now write some basic actions. Now, these are just test actions. They're not going to be part of our application. So I'm going to say export, or not export, I'm just going to say const test action 1 equals test action 1, and then const test action 1 equals arg goes into object type test action 1 arg. This is how all of our actions are going to be written. They're going to start off with the action type being a constant that's going to equal a unique string, in this case the variable name. Then they're going to have an action factory, which is a function that creates that action. And for the syntax to work, remember to add these parentheses, because otherwise it'll interpret the curlies as a block, and you don't want that. But what this will do is this function only just returns an object in the shape of the action that we want it to have. In this case, test action 1, which has one property called arg. So now let's do some simple stuff. I'm going to say it dispatches a simple action. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say dispatcher.on test action 1, and then I'm going to say on test action 1, we're going to have a callback that takes in an action, and this is going to be executed synchronously, so I can put my asserts inside of here. I'm going to say expect action.arg to be, I don't know, 42. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say dispatcher emit test action 1 passing in 42. So that's the basic way that we are going to integrate with the dispatcher. We're going to call .on, pass in an action name or action ID, and then a callback that should be invoked. We also want to be able to unsubscribe. So let's go ahead and write a test for that. It allows us to unsubscribe. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to say let count equals 0. I'm going to say dispatcher on test action 1. And then I'm not going to capture the action in this because I'm simply going to increment count. Then I'm going to say dispatcher emit test action 1, passing in an arbitrary argument. And so how do we want to be able to unsubscribe? Well, the way I want to do it is I want the on function to return a function that if we invoke the function, it will cause that subscription to be removed. So I'll say const sub equals this. Then after we emit the first time, I'm going to invoke sub. Then I'm going to invoke the action again. Then I'm going to expect count to be 1. So this is the basic way that we can use the dispatcher. There's another bit of syntax that I want to be able to support. It allows object syntax for actions. And this requires us to have multiple actions. So I'm going to write a const test action 2 equals test action 2 with a const test action 2 equals, I'm not going to worry about any arguments here. I'm just going to pass in type test action 2. And so after that, for when I say object syntax, I want to be able to say dispatcher on, but instead of passing in an action followed by a callback, I want to pass in an object. And the keys of the object will be the actions I want to subscribe to, and that the values will be the callback. So what we need to do is we need to be able to track when these things are invoked. So I'll say let action1 count equals 0, and then action2 count equals 0. I just actually noticed a bug with this that I'm going to bring up on video after we finish this test. Then I'm going to use new syntax from JavaScript that allows us to pass in the keys to an object that are computed. So in this case, it's test action1 in brackets, followed by a function that simply increments test action1, and then, or action1 count, sorry. Then we'll have test action2 do the same thing, but do action2 count, plus plus. And then we will say dispatcher dot emit test action1, just pass an arbitrary argument, and then dispatcher emit test action2, pass in no arguments because it doesn't want any. And then we will expect action1 count to be 1, and then expect action2 count to be 2. And this is just the basic structure of how I want to be able to use the dispatcher. We'll also add in convenience methods to the dispatcher. Let's go ahead and fix this test. Putting the expect inside the callback is a terrible, terrible idea that I just realized. Because if there's a bug that makes this callback not be executed, then this expect will never be even invoked. So I'm going to put a let action1 result at the top. Inside of the callback, I'll put action1 result equals action.arg. Then I'll take the expectation out, the assertion out, and put it down here and say action1 result to be 42. So just a little mistake on that part. We'll wrap this video up with one more little bit of test cases, or test case rather, and that is I also want to be able to test the observable syntax, because right now we're just dealing with callbacks, but our dispatcher should also support returning observables. So we'll say it allows us to subscribe with RxJS. Let's keep this simple. Let action1 arg equals, I don't want to make that equal anything. Then I'll say dispatcher, and the syntax will be dispatcher on money, followed by the action ID. And then this will return an observable. So I simply subscribe to it, and then the value of the subscription of the next function will be the action. So we'll go subscribe action goes into action1 arg equals action.arg. Then I should be able to say dispatcher emit, passing in test action1, passing in 42 again, because I like that number, and then say expect action1 arg to be 42. So kind of break up my arrange act assert up a little bit with line spaces. So those are the tests that kind of give you an idea of how I want to be able to use the dispatcher. And these are the core methods. On money, and emit are the core methods of this thing. But we're also going to be supporting some helper syntax as well. And with that, in the next video, we'll actually implement it. Right now, all of our tests should be failing, as you can see, which is good. Red, green, or red, green refactor, right? Or red refactor green. Something like that. I can't remember. But, yeah, just the general idea of doing tests this way gives us an idea of the API surface, like I said before, and it also prevents future bugs from cropping up. Obviously, in a real scenario, you would write more tests, more detailed tests, and you would test all the convenience methods that we're going to put on the dispatcher. But for now, this will test the core functionality. And with that, we'll see you guys in the next video.